John Wayne Gacy's killer clown. No one believed that John Wayne Gacy, a respected member of the Des Moines Chamber of Commerce, who was the laughingstock of children's parties and a well-known businessman, was one of the most terrifying serial killers in American history. Gacy was born in 1942 in Chicago. John had two sisters. One of them was 2 years older than him, and the other was 2 years younger than him. Gacy had a trouble-free childhood. Gacy's father was a restless person and a heavy alcoholic who beat his children and insulted them from time to time. Despite all this, Gacy loved his father very much and did everything to win his father's attention. When Gacy was 11 years old, he fell from the swing and hit his head badly. This incident was so severe that it caused Gacy to have mental disabilities until the age of 16. At the same age of 16, he went to the doctor, and after a successful surgery, a blood clot was removed from his brain. Gacy is recovering. As a teenager, Gacy changes his high school 4 times and never finishes school, but goes to college. When he is expelled from school, he leaves Chicago for Las Vegas. Gacy works as a part-time worker in Vegas, but since he doesn't enjoy living in Vegas and returns to Chicago, John Wayne Gacy enrolled in an economic college in 1960 and showed good talent in business. It is said that he could negotiate quickly. After graduation, Gacy worked as a management graduate in a company in Chicago and progressed very quickly, and after a few weeks he was promoted and took over the management of a clothing store. Gacy in 1964, with a woman named Marilyn Meyer, who was one of his colleagues, is getting married. Shortly after the marriage, this young couple moved to the city of Waterloo. Meyer's father offers Gacy a job in his family restaurant, and Gacy accepts. John Wayne Gacy worked in that restaurant from 1964 to 1966, until Meyer's father handed over the entire management of the restaurant to Gacy, and thus, Gacy became a well-known and famous person in their city. But the situation was not according to Murad Gacy. John, for the first time in 1968, 2 years after he took over the management of the restaurant, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for raping one of the employees in the restaurant and was transferred to one of the state prisons. John Wayne Gacy's wife, Marilyn Meyer, filed for divorce after his conviction, but this made Gacy very angry and informed him that she no longer wants to see Marilyn and her family. John was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but after serving 18 months of his sentence, he was pardoned on October 18, 1971, and returned to Chicago. And it was exactly 8 months after his release that he was arrested again on charges of sexual assault. Of course, this time he will not go to jail because the rape victim could not prove it. Shortly after he returned to Chicago, Gacy started working as a construction contractor. 3 years later, in 1975, he married a woman he had met through his friends. Later, with the help of his mother, he settled in a house in Des Moines neighborhood, which is a suburb of Chicago and a middle-class neighborhood. Gacy was ahead of his competitors because of the different offers he gave in the tenders. Gacy had devoted part of his free time to organizing a party for his friends and neighbors. He often dressed as a clown and went to children's hospitals for free and entertained them, and was a member of charity organizations. As one of the people present in the office of the Democratic Party, Gacy took a commemorative photo with Rosalynn Carter, the wife of Jimmy Carter, the President of the United States at the time. Gacy's second wife divorced him in March 1976. Why? Because he could no longer tolerate these unpredictable situations and Gacy's severe addiction to adult magazines. Gacy had no children from his second wife. On December 12, 1978, the police once again suspect John Wayne Gacy. Robert Pist, a teenager who worked in a pharmacy, had gone missing, and Gacy was the last person seen with the boy. When the police officers investigated Gacy's case, they were surprised to learn that Gacy had already gone to prison for rape and had been arrested once more. With this horrible information, the officers were able to obtain a search warrant from Gacy's house. In short, the police was finally able to find a way to enter Gacy's house. When the officers entered Gacy's house, they found a room in the basement of his house, and there was a very, very bad smell. The police believed that this bad smell was caused by sewage leakage. And then, without paying attention to the traces of the crimes that took place in this room, they returned to the police station to examine the findings. The police officers, during the examination of the equipment they had recorded from Gacy's house, they found that they unknowingly obtained important evidence. One of the clues found in Gacy's house was related to another teenager who went missing 1 year ago. And also, during the search of Gacy's house, the officers found a tape that belonged to Robert Pist, the same teenager who was missing. In 1978, Gacy, realizing that his scary secrets will soon be revealed, went to the police on his own feet and confessed. During his confession, Gacy told police detectives that 4 characters named John live in his body, explaining that one John was a contractor, one John was a clown, and one John was a politician. John the 4th, his real name is Jack Harvey, and he has done all the bad things. Despite all this, Gacy was not multi-personality. Gacy fully intended to pretend to be sick so that he could escape from execution and life imprisonment. During the interrogations, Gacy admitted that he committed the first murder in January 1974 and the second murder exactly 2 years later, in January 1976. Gacy told the victims that he wanted to teach them magic and claimed that there was a special way to open. There is the use of paper napkins to bind the hands. In this way, it satisfied the teenagers to tie their hands and feet. When the victims saw that their hands and feet were tied and they could not escape, they would struggle. And it was at this time that Gacy strangled the victims with a rope after sexual assault. Gacy voluntarily confessed to the murder of 24 teenagers, and this confession was while not answering all the police's questions and saying that you should ask Jack this question, Gacy exactly. He pointed to 28 burial places under his house and finally said that he killed 5 other people and threw them in the river. Police officers found the dead body in the basement room less than an hour after they started digging in Gacy's house. As days and weeks passed, the number of bodies found increased, while the media reported every detail of the search of Gacy's house. They were looking at the world. For a few months, the crimes of John Wayne Gacy were at the top of the American news. Gacy's house was known to all Americans and foreign visitors to the extent of the White House, and it was really terrible to dig into the details. Some of the victims were so close to each other that the police were sure they had been killed at the same time. By the end of January, police and construction workers killed the house one by one. They found 20 bodies. The search took too long due to freezing and cold weather. It was expected. Also, while they were searching Gacy's house, the murder of 4 other people whose bodies were found in Des Perennes River was attributed to Gacy, and the police found the personal belongings of these victims in Gacy's house. Here, it became clear that Gacy was lying, not to the police. And it is interesting to know that John Wayne Gacy spent 3 months of his life working in a mortuary. Why? Because he had necrophilia and raped corpses. And that when he was in prison, he used to paint with oil paint, and since he became famous worldwide, his paintings were sold at a very high price. Finally, in April 1979, the remains of Robert Pist's body were found around Des Perennes' house. An autopsy showed that Pist had died of suffocation, and Gacy was also accused of his murder. Gacy's trial began on February 6, 1980, in a Chicago courthouse. Gacy's defense lawyer tried to prove that his client was mentally ill and had no control over his actions in committing the murder, so he could escape execution. But the prosecutor strongly disagreed with the view that Gacy was mentally ill and emphasized that he had considered the death penalty for him. Be it after 2 hours of discussion, Gacy was finally found guilty of murdering 33 people. On March 16, 1980, Gacy was sentenced to death. He was sent to a correctional center and spent 14 years there. He was transferred to a state prison for execution. On May 9, 1994, John Wayne Gacy ate his last meal, which was a fried chicken press, soda, and strawberry shortcake. John Wayne, Gacy was executed by lethal injection at midnight on May 10, 1994. His last words before the execution were, "You should kiss my butt."